I've titled this Deathloop review a fun romp with a few annoying flaws. And it's specifically a fun time loop romp. And that, I think, sums it up pretty well. I've had a blast with it. I've found it to be a really fun game. And I think that if you're a fan of Arkane's previous games, if you're a fan of Dishonored, Dishonored 2, and or Prey, I think you will really like this game, and you should definitely check it out. Last week, of course, I talked about... I gave my first impressions review of Deathloop, and I had a very, very high impression of the game, and I still do. There's really nothing I said last week that I would change. I just want to flesh that out and really give a more full review, because I promised I would. Last week, the reviews on Steam were mixed because of technical problems. Pretty much every negative review I looked at was referencing the fact that the game wasn't running well, they were getting stuttering, low frame rates, that kind of thing. If you look at it today, the reviews are mostly positive. So there's been either a whole bunch of more positive reviews that have come over the course of the week, or a whole bunch of people went back and changed their review from not recommended to recommended. I don't know which, but either way, it's mostly positive right now, because there were some patches this week that seem to have fixed some of the problems. I don't think they're 100% fixed, but I did see multiple reviews today that said, after such and such patch, it ran much, much better. I don't want to change it, basically anything I said last week, but I will cover it all again in a more thorough way. Basically, I'll start with what I didn't like. Which, bear in mind, I give this game an 8 out of 10. So when I talk about what I don't like here, it didn't ruin my experience. But for a game that is what I'll call a Dishonored-like, kind of like, Prey was a little bit of a Dishonored-like. This one more so, with a focus on the powers and things like that. It was a bit of a disappointment in that aspect of it. The powers that you get as a protagonist, I feel they were passable. They were not bad, but I feel like they were really kind of bare bones as far as creativity goes. There really wasn't much innovative compared to Dishonored 1 and 2 or Prey. I think Prey, which of course also came out after Dishonored 2, had more creative powers, and that was also, a very high-tech setting in that game. I thought they were a little more creative with the powers. I feel like Arkane spent all of their creativity on world creation, and the world is amazing. The world's really good. They spent all their creativity there, which didn't leave much left over for coming up with cool powers. That's kind of the impression I got. So it's unfortunate in that respect. And I also commented last week that the combat was very basic, and I will echo that again tonight. It didn't really get any better. The boss enemies that you encounter, the visionaries that you're supposed to kill, they are smarter than the other enemies, but outside of some scripted intelligence, like some scripted behavior that they do, I just found overall the combat is very basic. It seemed like they were it was very predictable algorithms for how enemies behave, and while there are first of all, there's enemies everywhere. There's enemies everywhere, and they all want to kill you. But they all kind of, like, there are different personalities, different tactics that they'll use. Some just run right up at you without any regard for the fact that you're aiming a shotgun at their face. Others will take cover and try to snipe you. But whatever algorithms are controlling their behavior seemed very basic. So, combat was not bad. It was not good. It was middle of the road. It was clearly not the focus of this game, which, in other words, it wasn't what they spent the majority of their time on. It was not. They were not aiming to make a combat game in a cool world, whereas with Dishonored, I would say, they definitely focused in on making the combat really, really good. With this one, it felt like the combat was more of a secondary element, which is too bad because I felt like that was a missed opportunity. If they had, say, they could have copied over the combat system from Dishonored 2 into this game and made no changes to it whatsoever, and it would have been better than what's there. So that's how I feel about it. And I'm just going to cut in here from the editing booth. Hello, this is still Ash from the next day after this was live streamed. But as I was listening back to this, I realized there was an important aspect that I neglected to mention during the podcast, and that is the weapons. I thought the weapons were actually really good and really well done, and there were some creative aspects to them that I really enjoyed. Even though there isn't a huge variety of weapons, and there's only one melee weapon to speak of, unless you count your foot, there's a wide variety of customization options for each weapon, and as you get to the higher tiers of weapons, which you'll definitely want to do because the lower tiered ones jam and don't work very well, the higher tiered ones are not only more powerful and work better, but they have special abilities attached to them. You'll see a few here. I've got a shotgun that basically transforms so that it can either, shoot pellets or it can shoot a slug, and it just transforms on the fly with a really cool animation. I've got a wicked sniper rifle, and I've also got a nail gun, which is your stealth ranged weapon. And there's a variety of other ones, SMGs, other types of pistols, and things like that. But in addition to the trinkets that you can add to the weapons, which are basically mods that you can attach to them that have various effects, the high-level weapons each have a built-in effect, and if you manage to pick up the high-level weapon more than once, it'll have a different effect each time. So for example, the nail gun that I have actually has an echolocation property so that wherever the projectile impacts, it'll show you where enemies are within a certain radius of that. And so that's that blue splashy explosion animation that you're seeing. But there's other effects like slowing enemies or the spread narrowing the longer you fire it on a particular auto pistol. So they actually did quite a lot with the weapons that they put in this game. I wish they had done the same with the powers. I wish there were more and more variety to them. But I just wanted to add that in. Now I'm going to cut back to the original review that I gave on our live podcast. It was still fairly difficult because of the volume of the enemies and the fact that a lot of them have deadly accurate aim. It was still difficult to deal with combat if you had more than like 2 or 3 enemies around you. Like if you got them on multiple sides of you, you were in trouble. So it's not like it was easy. It's not that it was easy. It's just the AI. I wasn't impressed with the AI. That's what I'm saying. I also commented here, I would have liked a more fleshed out melee system with at least the ability to parry. So this was the major thing that pulled me out of the immersion and reminded me I was playing a game, was just how the enemies behaved. But other than that's my big complaint. And like I said, I still give this game an 8 out of 10 because the world and setting were incredible. Beyond the time loop aspect of it, the time loop is very cool. But, the island that you go to has layers of history that you uncover as you go through, as you dig deeper into what's going on in the game. The people that are there presently while you're playing the game haven't always been there, and so there were people who were there before, and then people who were there before them, and so you dig into all of those layers of history. So, considering they condensed this game into such a compact area, the history they built for this island was very, very interesting, and I love stuff like that. I love it when there's different layers of history in layers of lore in a game that you can dig up. Plus, just the things like the soundtrack were so good. There's one of the characters in the game is like a 60s rocker guy, and
nice.
They've written a whole album's worth of his songs. I don't actually know how many songs there were. There's at least 4 or 5, maybe more. But then they're all like, they're so good. They're so good. They sound like songs that could have been hit songs back in the 50s or 60s. In a lot of cases, and they're playing on radios throughout the world as you're going through. And so sometimes I would just sit and listen because the songs were so good. The guy who writes them is a total asshole, but that's another story. And which brings me to another point. The characters were very well written. Now, they're a little bit over the top in some ways, but that's kind of the style of the game. A little over the top. Colt and Juliana, both a little bit over the top. Their banter is, very witty. Maybe not witty to the point where it's like, yeah, it would really actually be difficult to, be this witty in real time. But it was actually, it's just really well written. The dialogue's really well written. One thing I noticed, like, there was not the reliance on cliches and cringe that I so often encounter. I hate cliched dialogue, and I didn't really encounter much of that in this game. So I was very happy about that. That's just a particular pet peeve of mine, that I hate cliched dialogue, and so I was happy that I can't really think of any that I encountered. There's a hint in the game, a big hint. Some are calling it an Easter egg. It's not really an Easter egg, because it just it comes during one of the major story cutscenes, and they actually dwell on it a little bit. This Deathloop very well might be set in the same world as Dishonored. Now, there might be some varying opinions about that. I kind of think that's really cool. They didn't rely, like, there was no hints of that other than this one part of the game. And I won't talk about what it is. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it could be the same world as Dishonored. And like, it's a very strong hint. It would explain a lot, because there's a lot of similarities in, especially when it comes to the powers you use. Felt so much like Dishonored in some ways, even though, as I said earlier, I think Dishonored did it better. But just kind of the way that the graphics look when you're using the powers, I was like, this is so much like Dishonored. But then there's the time loop. So this is the most intriguing part of the game. So there's 4 time periods throughout the day that you can go to, and you can visit one of 4 regions on the island in each of these time periods. And at the end of the day, everything resets except for a very few select things that don't reset. One of those things is your memory, of course. So all the information that you gather on one day carries with you into the next day, which is the next loop. And so the game turns into a big time puzzle as you try and figure out, what do I have to do in order to set things up so that I can accomplish all my objectives in the same day? Because that's the objective, that's the final objective of the game. So sometimes it's a question of figuring out where the hell is a character at a given time. Or if I perform a certain action in the morning, then it'll result in the character doing something different, being somewhere completely different than they would otherwise. Now, once you discover it, the game kind of spoon feeds it to you simultaneously. So, it's not a game you necessarily need to be, having a stack of notebooks beside you to keep track of everything. The game keeps track of everything for you. I almost wish there was an option to turn that off, so I could just figure it out all myself. But anyway, I guess they didn't want the difficulty curve to be too high. But it's regardless, it's a very fun discovery process. Saib, you asked me last week if the game was repetitive, and I didn't find it repetitive. You are going through the same areas over and over again, but there was enough variety and enough different things to explore in each area. Like, each area is fairly large and has different sub-regions within it, that I didn't get to the point where I found it repetitive. So now some players might find it repetitive, but there are things like at different times of day, the different areas can be very different. For example, in the afternoon, the snowstorm blows in, and whereas you had nice weather in the morning, but in the afternoon everything's covered in snow in all of the different areas of the island. And then in the evening, the snow still kind of sticks around, but there's this big nightlife going, or like in one area, there's that's where the nightlife is happening. And so there's people everywhere, and there's cool stuff going on, whereas in other areas it's almost deserted. Also, you can always skip ahead to the time period you want, so there's no waiting around. So that was a really good feature that they put in. As I said, the dialogue was superb. Story quite intriguing. It keeps you guessing and asking questions, while at the same time it just lets you enjoy the ride, right? So it doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, the whole game has a very comical, whimsical edge to it, but at the same time, it also delivers very serious and thought-provoking subtext with questions like, what if you were living the same day over and over again? What would that do to your mind? And after you've done that for hundreds and hundreds of years, how do you store all that information in there? And like, it asks these kinds of questions, and would you eventually go insane and just want to be done with it? So some thought-provoking stuff, as well as it just being kind of a whimsical setting. The ending boils down to one or two simple choices that you make at the end of the game. Don't expect a Dishonored-style complexity of ending, sort of based on the way you played the game. They don't have that in there, which is, both a blessing and a curse, because it's like, well, you can totally screw things up and then go back and just go to the next loop and try it again with no consequence, because everything kind of resets, right? But at the same time, it'd be nice. Might be nice to have, like, I really liked that aspect of Dishonored, where it's like, if you play a certain way, if you murder a lot of people, then you can only get the bad endings, and there's different degrees of things. But I think that wasn't necessarily necessary in this game, and they don't have that in this game. But if that affects your opinion of it going into it, then I would say, yeah, don't go in expecting that. And also expect a lot of questions to remain unanswered. The game, it spoon feeds you your objectives, but it does not spoon feed you the story at all, or the why are things a certain way. There's a lot of hinting, there's a lot of subtext, a lot of discovering the story through interacting with the world. It leaves a lot to theorize and wonder about at the end. Not really in a way that frustrated me, but kind of in a way where I might sit down with a friend who just finished playing the game as well, and have kind of a fun conversation about, like, why do you think this was? Why do you think that was? In that kind of a way, rather than, not in a way that frustrated me personally. But again, wanted to mention that because if that's not your jam, then maybe that's not the game for you. But overall, like I said at the beginning, if you enjoyed Dishonored and you enjoyed Prey, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy this game and get your money's worth from it. I definitely have. I suspect that I'm not really sure how much replay value it's going to have, because Dishonored had a lot of replay value in the fact that you could play different ways and discover different endings that way. And also it would change your experience in game of, how playing certain ways. There isn't that much in this one. I don't know. I'm really, really curious to see, is there a different way to accomplish all the objectives, to kill all the visionaries? A different way than the one that the game just provides for you once you've discovered all the data you need. I'm very, very curious about that. So I might spend some time sitting down to try and figure that out. But I don't necessarily have high hopes for discovering something there, but that would be really, really awesome if there was actually alternate solutions that you could discover. That would be fantastic. I don't know if I can expect that or not, but there are, of course, a whole bunch of achievements that look like they're going to be really fun and challenging to get, and I'm definitely going to try my hand at a few of those. So there's definitely replay value there if that's your thing. Story-wise, not so much.